Hey, do you want to play a game of Monopoly? It's a deal. Monopoly Deal is a re-implemented version of the original Monopoly board game where players had to monopolize the wealth of other players and force them into bankruptcy. Monopoly Deal, however, is a faster, more interactive card game version of the original Monopoly game, where here, players are trying to collect different sets of coloured property by dealing and stealing them from the other players. The player with the most efficient game plan and game strategy and can acquire 3 different coloured property sets first will win the game. To begin a game of Monopoly Deal, each player begins with 5 very shiny cards dealt from the central playing deck. On a player's turn, players will draw 2 cards from the top of the draw deck and play up to 3 cards from their hand. Playing area is like a well-zoned city block with its own communal draw and discard pile where players will be playing their action cards into. Each player also has their own luxuriously private property and bank holding area positioned right in front of them. There are 3 different ways that players can use cards from their hand. Firstly, they can put money or action cards into their bank for their cash value. Secondly, if a player has a property card in their hand, they can place it face up in their property area. Players are never allowed to place properties into their bank piles. And finally, players can also play action cards into the center and trigger their effects. When players decide to deposit a card into their bank, any action cards that go here become nullified, but the money listed on them can be used to pay rent or other players when needed to. If a player's bank is ever empty and they are asked to pay rent, that player will need to pay with their properties instead. When players place a property, they lay them out meticulously in color-coordinated piles to show the other players what they've collected so far. It's like a high-end fashion parade done Monopoly style. If you ever owe money to another player, you can pay them with your property's monetary value. However, they now acquire your property from you and they get to place it in front of them. Rent in Monopoly Deal is handed in a streamlined fashion. Basically, the more you own of a particular colored property set, the more rent you can charge the other players. For example, if you own all 3 yellow properties, you can charge a rent of up to 6 Monopoly dollars. When a player plays an action card, there are several different effects that can happen. An It's My Birthday card forces all players to play the active player 2 Monopoly dollars. A 2-colored action rental card can allow players to charge rent on one of the matching colored properties. A double rent card can allow players to charge double the amount of rent on one of their properties. A multicolored rent card allows a player to charge rent on any one of their colored properties. A house or a hotel card allows players to increase the rental value of a completed colored property set. A forced deal card allows players to swap another player's property with one from your own collection. A deal breaker card allows you to steal an entire colored property set from another player. A Just Say No card allows you to cancel effect when another player plays an action card on you. A Sly Deal card allows you to steal a single property from another player. It cannot be used against a full property set, and wild property cards can be used to substitute for a missing property color that you need. There are a plethora of reasons why I would recommend Monopoly Deal over the original Monopoly board game. First of all, Monopoly Deal is less luck-based and players have a greater sense of control over their fate and success in the game. The power of the card draw and the variety of action cards means that in this version of Monopoly, players have a greater sense of control and ownership, and the decisions and the choices that they make throughout the game will propel them forward and hopefully gain them a victory. Whereas in the original Monopoly game, players were often at the whim of a bad dice roll, and if they had several bad dice rolls in a row, there was no way to mitigate that really bad effect, and thus it kind of felt a little bit skewered. Whereas in Monopoly Deal, players can kind of plan out their 3 actions on their turn, have a really good strategy, and then see whether that strategy leads them to success. Good try, man, but no dice. Property ownership in this version of Monopoly has more interesting mechanics attached to it. You never truly own the properties that you have. The constant cycling and fluid movement of property ownership occurs quite frequently throughout the game. It's like a limited resource that everybody needs, but there's not enough to go around, so that there is this feeling that players feel like they're playing a game of tug of war. Players are constantly trying to protect their properties from being stolen by other players. Adding hotels and houses isn't the primary goal anymore, but rather it is used as a property enhancer to force your opponents into paying you with their cards, but ultimately their properties. The power of the action cards truly promotes greater player interaction, which makes the game a whole lot more fun and those actions a lot more meaningful. There is an interesting take that element where players can scheme against each other to stop the others from winning. There is also an element of the unknown as to what sort of action cards players may be hiding in their hands. These interactions are very reminiscent of the style of actions that people often see in the card game Uno, where the outcome of the game can change based on the types of action cards that players play, leading to some really tense and nail-biting moments. This ensures that the game remains leveled and even between players. It stops one player from dominating the game and prevents the runaway leader effect from occurring. This means that in Monopoly Deal, the game state constantly changes as different coloured property sets move and shift between different players, meaning that you'll never truly know who will win until it happens. In Monopoly Deal, there is no game board whatsoever. The layout of the original Monopoly game board was a hindrance in many ways, as it forced players to travel in a singular direction around and around the board where the properties increased in both their expense and value. In Monopoly Deal, the property sets are scattered throughout the entire deck, and players have several ways that they can acquire those sets by either stealing them, or forcing deals with other players, or collecting an entire property set that another player has built up. The wild property cards are an excellent addition to this game as it allows players to fish up particular property sets that they want to collect from the other players. Players can use them to try and outcompete other players who are trying to complete the same coloured property set and use them to fill in any of those missing gaps in their collection. Collecting particular property sets in Monopoly Deal is a lot more efficient and easier to acquire. The fact that players can simply play a property card and not have to bid or exchange money for it makes the game a whole lot more focused. The rental mechanic is a whole lot more interesting. Players are now charged with rent based on the combination of colours that they have collected, rather than what they rolled and where they landed, like in the classic version of Monopoly. Monopoly Deal is a small, portable, travel-worthy game, which means it can be easily taken away on holidays as it can be stored in your luggage as you're simply taking and packing a small deck of cards. Yes! Time to go exploring! Monopoly Deal is also played and finished in about 20 minutes, which means it has a very short playtime, unlike in the original Monopoly game, which often takes hours, days, months, or even years to finish. Unlike in the classic version of Monopoly, the concept and the idea of a jail is completely absent in the game Monopoly Deal. The jail space in the original Monopoly game often tied players up and prevented them from moving around the board and landing on certain spaces and thus performing certain actions. This can almost be compared equivalently to the idea of missing a turn in those really old roll and move games, which can often be really frustrating for players because the last thing you want to do on your turn is have nothing to do, especially when you're falling behind. With the absence of the jail in Monopoly Deal, players have a greater chance to perform the actions that they want, and also because of the game's design, the idea that all players are racing to the same win condition and vying for the same win condition, the fact that players can execute those actions even if they're coming last and swing the game in their favour and potentially take out a victory means that in Monopoly Deal, there's a high level of excitement and a high level of satisfaction when players conquer and actually swing through with a win at the end of the game. The dual function of the cards means that players have a greater choice on each and every turn. For example, do you play the action card as it is, or store it into your bank and use it as cash for later use? Monopoly Deal presents players with a greater opportunity to develop and implement a core game strategy. The options for doing this differ remarkably from the original base game. Players can decide to conceal information or important cards in their hand from the other players and save them from when it is most advantageous and most optimal to use them. Keeping and playing a paired property set in the late game that only require 2 cards to complete helps to finish the game off really quickly. It is also important to note that the cards are a currency of actions that players can draw upon throughout the game. If you get a chance to steal a property card, try and go for the wild property cards, as they will give you more flexibility and more options to complete the property sets that you want. Also, never underestimate the power of drawing more cards into your hand, because this means you'll always have more options. If you have to draw 5 and get a go card, use it to draw 2 more cards to give you even more choices. In conclusion, Monopoly Deal is a well-refined version of Monopoly, which is far more fun than the original game itself. The cool tweaks to the game design and the twists in the gameplay mean means that the game still evokes the original theme quite well, which is a plus in my books. The game, however, focuses a lot more on set collecting and meaningful player decisions and interactions, which means that players are spending more time planning and optimizing their moves and seeing how they resolve, which is so much more better than the original game. Monopoly Deal is an excellent gateway game to the plethora of modern board games out there. See you, Mum. I'm leaving. Oh my God, it's beautiful! Thank you once again for joining me for another Board Game Sanctuary video. If you really like this video, please remember to smash the like, subscribe, and share button. I also want to say a huge shout out to all the people who currently subscribe to this channel. It really well and truly means a lot to me, and I want to say thank you. This is Danny signing out, and I'll see you gamers in the near future. Goodbye!